I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata, and I'm also Managing Director of Town Body Corporate on the Gold Coast. And for this Queensland webinar, I'm very happy to welcome Michael Kleinschmidt from Stratum Legal. This webinar is about applications for renovations in a body corporate. We'll be addressing topics such as, does your improvement have the potential to damage common property? And what happens if a lot owner has removed a wall between their two apartments, creating one super apartment? Did they seek approval? And if they did, can the body corporate reasonably say no? Michael has a presentation and then we'll move on to some questions. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that the information contained in the session, including the discussions that arise from submitted questions, is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as legal advice. You should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in the session. I'm delighted to introduce our panellists today, Michael Kleinschmidt from Stratum Legal. Michael is a legal practitioner director of Stratum Legal, a specialist law firm on the Sunshine Coast. Michael practices in all areas of strata law for every type of stakeholder across Queensland, and he is a fellow and council member of the Australian College of Strata Lawyers. Michael is a regular contributor to LookUpStrata, and we thank him for that. He has submitted multiple articles and also assists our Queensland readers by responding to their Q&As. He regularly appears in our bi-weekly newsletters and monthly Queensland Strata magazines. This is the second time Michael has joined us for a webinar. We covered solar in strata just over a year ago, and keep a lookout for a third appearance, which is happening very soon, where he's joined by another one of our regular presenters. And that's one I'm sure that you won't want to miss, and we'll tell you more about that at the end of the session. I'm going to be in chat, so I'll leave you with Michael now to carry on the presentation, and I'll join you later on. So thanks, Michael. Welcome to the session.
Morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Nikki, for your kind introduction. I must admit, this is it's a bit of a highlight of my week. I do love the controversy as well, so send in as many controversial questions as you possibly can. And when I have that presentation on Airbnb with Chris, the gloves are off. I'll choose whichever position is the most controversial, have a bit of fun. So make sure you get your questions in on that one. Now, look, I'll just, I do have a pre-prepared presentation. So what we'll do is I'll just share that so that you can have a look at the slides. And then away we go.
Excellent. Thanks, so, Michael. That looks really good.
I know. So look, the way I thought I would approach this topic, which believe you me, I could probably give a whole series of presentations on during an entire day, is to have a look at the way I usually deal with them when I am asked to assist with a renovation proposal, because I do follow a pretty logical, straightforward sequence, which I think is useful for you to understand whether you're a committee member, a lot owner, or a body corporate manager, because it does give you a bit of an insight into how the lawyers try to crack these things as a problem, because almost inevitably that's how they're initially viewed. And probably the first thing I'd say is that, you know, with any renovation proposal, you know, your first time is always the one that you remember, typically because you're nervous, things can go horribly wrong, and it's a good idea to try and prepare in advance. So how do you prepare in advance? Well, I recommend you go through an appreciation process first, and that is appreciate your building. What does your building look like? Get your development approval, get your building approval, get your survey plans, get your building plans. All of that stuff should be body corporate records already anyway. And once you've got all that stuff, have a look at the age of your building and what sort of renovations people are likely to do. Internal renos, you know, we're a bit addicted to them here in Australia. We like to renovate, and you know, appreciating the sorts of renovations that people are going to want to do will really help you. You know, whether someone's going to do coastal barn or you know, Hamptons doesn't really matter that much. But if they're going to knock down a structural wall, then yeah, that's a much bigger issue. If you can go through that process and get to the point where you've got a common understanding amongst the ownership group within your body corporate about how you want to approach renovations, that's fantastic, because you can turn it into a bit of a policy to start with, policies aren't really enforceable in the body corporate context unless they're reflected in a bylaw, so that's where you try and take it to. Bylaws are great, they're a good start, but they're certainly not the be all and end all. The top level control that you can have in a community title scheme is what's called an architectural or landscaping code. They form part of your community management statement. They're not a bylaw, they're a separate part of the community management statement. You may see them in new complexes where they've been put in place by the developer. You can put them in place later on, but it will take a resolution without dissent to do so. And those architectural and landscaping codes don't have the limitations contained in bylaws, so they can be very powerful in terms of how you regulate development inside your scheme. So if you've got a renovation bylaw, more power to you, and your first time should go a bit smoother because someone has thought about it beforehand. Of course, most of the time, that renovation bylaw can be really simple and oftentimes is outdated. So it might be something like, you know, thou shalt not change the external appearance of the building without committee approval. And that's the one that I see most often. So usually the committee will receive a proposal from a lot owner. There'll be some plans attached to it, some drawings, a bit of a verbal, you know, a bit of a description of what's proposed to happen. And then it'll be, can you please just give me the tick of approval? Now, that's the point at which I most often get instructions, thankfully. Sometimes I'll get instructions later when work's have already started. And that one's always fun because you have to consider whether to pop off to the Commissioner's office to try and get an interim order to stop it. So when that stuff comes in, when that material comes into me and I've been engaged to provide some advice, well, what's the first thing I do? I ask this question, so what do we have here? And what that involves is getting into the real nitty-gritty of what the proposal is all about. It's a bit of an exercise, you know, when I was a kid, you used to have those puzzles where you would spot the difference. And so what you do is you grab out the development approval with the approved plans and then the construction plans and the survey plan, and you grab those drawings that have been provided to you with the renovation proposal, and you're then sitting there spotting the difference. You know, what's what, you know, what is proposed to happen here. Some draftspersons and architects are really good in that they'll provide to you a set of plans that show you the existing and the proposed, and that makes it a lot easier to try and identify what those changes are. But the level of detail that you need to go with this is really, really pretty heavy duty. So for example, a live example for you, I was looking at a renovation proposal where a kitchen was being relocated inside a building. And of course, the committee was pretty much okay with it. And I said, well, hang on a minute, guys, have you considered the wet services? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, you know, you're going to need like, you know, 32 mil drainage to come out of the new kitchen sink. That's got to go somewhere. Is it going through, is it going to be a slab penetration? Is it going to be trenched into the slab? That's a structural slab between one unit and another unit. Are you okay with that? You know, what about fire? What about the structural integrity? So you can see that that sort of really fine-grained stuff can trigger a whole heap of other questions that you need to think about and to deal with. So when you're doing that exercise, one of the things that you have to understand is what's been approved by the development approval and the building approval. And the development approval conditions can actually lead to questions as well. I had one not too long ago where a structure was being erected on a rooftop, which effectively added an extra story to the building, which then meant that the development approval conditions were being breached because the building was supposed to be 7 stories only. And when that renovation was completed, it then became an 8-story building, which then leads into questions of, does this lot owner have the appropriate development approval from council? And then that brings in the question of, does the body corporate have to give consent to the making of that development application? So you see, you know, there's all these questions that flow on from just one little fact. So once you've gone through that exercise of looking at development approval, building plans, survey plans, and all that jazz, you have worked out exactly what is proposed to happen. And when you've worked out those things, and I'll typically draw a list So it'll be things like, internal renovation works, bang, relocation of wet services, installation of power, installation of pergola, common property ? And I'll have a list of all of this stuff. And then what I do is I grab out the survey plan in particular and say to myself, well, has everybody drawn inside the lines? And when I say my 2-year-old could draw within the lines, why can't this architect? I mean it. I've got a lot of time and respect for most architects, but I'd love to smack all their heads together and show them how to read a survey plan properly, and more particularly to explain to them what it means if you draw outside the lines. I've had any number of cases in the past where, gutters, roof lines, pergolas have all encroached into common property airspace, presumably because nobody was aware of where those boundaries are. Little bit of secret sauce, strata lawyers' secrets. The registrar's guidelines for the preparation of plans in Queensland are the Bible. So if you can read a survey plan, like a building format plan, that's great. But if you're looking at where a property boundary is for a rooftop courtyard that has a part structure on it, and then the rest of it is open to the airspace, how do you work out where those lines are? Pop over to the registrar's guidelines for the preparation of plans. There is a comprehensive description of exactly how you can find the boundaries. And then once you've found those boundaries, you superimpose those on what's proposed in the renovation, and you end up with, is it all inside the lines? Now you say to me, well, why is that so important? The reason that it's so important is that really drives what level of approval you need. And the level of approval that you need if you're doing work on common property can be very high. So if you are proposing to do something on a common property, or you get a proposal in that's going to deal with common property, even in an incidental way, you have to consider the lead case, which is Katsiwhat and the centre. It's a Court of Appeal case, and that spinning chaos order thing does spin most people out when they think about what it actually means. It's the yin and the yang of renovations that involve common property. There are two parts to this test, or I should say there are two types of approval that you need. So this Katsiwhat case basically says that if any lot owner is going to make an improvement to the common property for the benefit of their lot, and that can be something as minor as, enlarging a window between the lot and the common property, through to whacking a pergola over the top of a courtyard, which is out on the common property. Not only do you need body corporate approval to put that thing there, you need body corporate approval to keep it there. So putting it there is not enough. Put and keep. You need both of those things, approval to build and approval to stay. And you would know already in the regulation modules that the improvement to common property, there's a level of approval there, which will typically be either a committee level approval or a general meeting approval based on whether it's a minor improvement, so a cost limitation, and then whether or not it's going to affect the amenity of the scheme, etc. That's just one of the two approvals that you need. The second approval, which is the approval to keep things there, is based on this idea that in the Katsiwhat case, if you're making what is effectively a permanent improvement to the common property for the benefit of your lot, and it's to the exclusion of the other lot owners, then you're effectively appropriating a bit of the common property to your own benefit. Now, of course, common property is owned by all the lot owners pro rata their interest schedule lot entitlements. And that means that when you go and build that thing on the common property, you're ousting all of your neighbours. They no longer get to use and enjoy that common property. So when you dispose of common property or dispose of an interest in common property, that's a pretty big deal. And so, a transfer of common property is achievable. You can redraw the common property boundaries and incorporate a bit of common property into the lot. I've done that for renovation proposals where that was appropriate. I'm looking at one in Noosa at the moment. You can do exclusive use, which is actually pretty good because it has the same sort of level of tenure that the transfer does in terms of not being able to be taken away from you, but you don't have to go through the process of doing, subdivision reconfiguration approvals and whatnot. Then you get into things like leases and licenses and stuff like that. And as we would know, a lease or a license, depending on your regulation module, can be a special resolution or a resolution without dissent, depending on the number of years of the lease or license. So now that said, there are other ways that you can occupy the common property that don't involve transfer, exclusive use, a lease or a license. And one of those ways is actually through the use of an easement. And those easements, the most powerful one in the renovation context is what we call the statutory easements for utility infrastructure. So this is services. In the Land Title Act, there are statutory easements that grant rights against lots and in favour of common property and vice versa to be able to run utility infrastructure in support of the lot or the common property. Now, an easement obviously is a right of occupation. And so if you remember the Katsiwhat test, where you need an approval to put it there, and then you need an approval to keep it there. If you're putting in something like a new power line to come in and service your electric barbecue that you're doing as part of your renovation, and you've got to come across the common property to do it, as long as the cost of that is below the minor improvement limit, you're looking at a committee resolution, because you don't have to do a lease or a license of the common property because you've got the easement that you can rely upon. So that's really handy, and a good architect or a good draftsperson who's thinking these issues through would take advantage of that, because you can drop the level of approval down to a committee level of approval for the whole renovation proposal if you're not tripping any other tripwires. So these easements, these statutory easements, there are conditions attaching to them, and you've got to comply with those conditions. But of course, they're really powerful, and they do deal with things other than utility services. There's stuff like maintaining or replacing support, maintaining or replacing a structure that provides shelter or protection for your lot. And there's also things like maintaining and replacing minor projections into the common property. So now that you understand, if you're dealing with renovations on common property, there's this sort of two-part test. That's one of the triggers. There are other triggers, including, for example, if you've got a bylaw, but most of the time you'll be dealing with the Act or the regulation module and how they regulate what's being proposed. So after you've got the plans in and you've identified what all the things are that are happening, you've worked out whether or not they're inside the lines or not, so whether or not they're wholly inside the lot or they're also on common property. You then have a look at the Act and see what approvals are necessarily required to be able to approve that renovation proposal, and you look at the level of those approvals that you're going to need. Are they a general meeting approval? Are they a committee approval, etc.? Now I'm going to circle back to bylaws, because we consider the Act and the regulation module. And if we have a scheme that hasn't got a really good renovation bylaw in place, they haven't gone through that process of getting a good one together and adopting it, what normally happens then, from my point of view as a lawyer looking at a renovation proposal, is that I go and trawl over the bylaws. And usually when I get instructions, I'll get the committee saying to me, hey, look, this proposal is going to breach the external appearance bylaw. So we're worried that this guy's dodgy. We want you to impose like a $50,000 performance bond. Well, you've got to look at what your bylaws actually say as opposed to what you think they say. And that external appearance bylaw, it's permissive. So it's a yes-no proposition. But it doesn't necessarily, for a body corporate who's acting reasonably, allow you to impose a whole heap of conditions. performance bonds cannot be imposed under a bylaw because they're a financial obligation or liability, and bylaws don't permit that. So you can't build a performance bond into a bylaw. You could build a performance bond into an architectural and landscaping code. That would be permissible. When we're dealing with those external appearance bylaws too, I mean, you can find yourself in a situation where you're scratching around trying to ask, well, if they're going to change the blinds that you see through the windows, is that changing the external appearance? And so can we hold up approval because we don't like those people from lot 3? And of course, my answer to that 9 times out of 10 is going to be absolutely not. You know, that's an unreasonable position to adopt. And you've got to act reasonably when you're enforcing your bylaws. So most committees then scratch their head and say, oh, geez, well, this is no good because, you know, there's going to be a whole heap of problems here and can you help us? And I'll say, well, we've got to get through this one. When we get to the end, we'll put together a really good renovation bylaw that addresses the problems. But until then, let's see what else we can do to regulate this particular proposal. And to do that, I go hunting wabbits. So I grab out my shotgun because you tend to get more game if you take your shotgun. And I go through every single bylaw in the community management statement. And I ask the question, is any of the renovation activity going to be caught by one or more of these other bylaws? So things like noise, rubbish on the common property, parking, all of that stuff. You know, renovations will typically involve, depending on how big they are, you might have contractors turning up, you might have materials turning up, you've got all sorts of things going on. And so what I'll then do is I'll turn around and say, now look, having regard to normal construction activity, these other bylaws are likely to be applicable. So let's treat those bylaws as also then potentially being breached by this renovation proposal if it goes ahead without some sort of agreement or regulation. That agreement or regulation can typically be done in a couple of different ways. The first is by giving approval through a motion, whether it's a committee motion or a general meeting motion, or through doing like a renovation deed. Now, the reason I've chosen functions and relations is that a motion is really sort of a one-way street. And that is the body corporate gives approval for the renovations to occur on certain conditions, but that motion is only binding from the point of view that if the lot owner doesn't abide by the conditions of the approval, then you're going to have a breach of bylaws or you're going to have a breach of the Act. And so you've got to go enforce that breach of bylaws or enforce the breach of the Act. And so you're limited in terms of how you can do your enforcement process. Whereas if you do a deed, and I've done this for more complicated renovation proposals, you end up in a situation with an agreement that you can sue on, which gives you options potentially outside of the Commissioner's Dispute Resolution Service. So you can go to a real court and sue people for real money. We've got one of these on the go at the moment where there was a renovation proposal to effectively amalgamate 2 lots, punch a hole through the structural floor to put in a staircase and a lift. And there were fire problems, there were development approval problems, there were all sorts of stuff. So we said, right, let's do a deed, including so that we can do some performance bond stuff and to make sure that it's enforceable. So that's more of a relation situation where it's a two-way street where the body corporate's giving a consent, the lot owner's doing things, there's an agreement, there's all of those features of an agreement between the parties. And obviously what you're doing at that point in time is asking which one is going to be more appropriate for this circumstance. Obviously your headwear like this one, that's the wrong use of a pair of pants. So when you're asking what's the best way to give approval for this renovation proposal, choose the right tool. And a lot of bodies corporate make the mistake of just saying, oh, we'll just approve it with a motion. That really ties your hands later on if you've got to enforce it. Now, of course, after you give your approval, that's not necessarily the end of the equation. Your responsibility as a body corporate doesn't necessarily end with approval. It ends when the job is done and it's done right. And I say when the job is done, I've had renovations that have been part finished and, you know, they've turned into these enormous issues because no one's finished them. And then I've also had jobs where they've been done, but the work's been horrible and you end up with problems down the track. So in that situation, what you want to do is be very clear, whether as part of your motion or part of your deed, about things like start dates and end dates, other key performance indicators like has it been done by a licensed tradesperson to an appropriate standard. And you want to have independent verification of that stuff. So I usually work into my deeds, particularly an independent expert appointed by the body corporate who will sign off on things. Otherwise, if you can choose an appropriately qualified expert for various things that is a member of a certain professional organisation paid for by the lot owner, that's okay too. You know, that one with, you know, amalgamating the two lots and putting a staircase through, fire was an issue. So we ended up getting a certification from a fire engineer in relation to that issue. Those guys and gals are very specialised, and you know they're not going to sign off on something, you know, just because they've been engaged by a lot owner. They're going to make sure that it's done right. Now, of course, if you build your consent appropriately, you've got a fair bit of authority in relation to how you can deal with people. But be careful. Just like Cartman here, a little bit of authority can go to certain people's heads. You've got to remember that the body corporate in the discharge of its functions has to act reasonably. And so, you know, small issues that arise, you know, unless they're crucial, you know, live and let live, but also watch out for lot owners who you give an inch and they take a mile. They are out there, and when you spot them, my typical technique is I use the train. I tell them that a train's coming and that if they don't get off the tracks, they're going to get run over. And then I tell them again that the train's coming. And then I say, now you can hear the train. So, and then of course they get smacked because they don't get out of the way. So you give them plenty of warning, consistently give them plenty of warning about what's going to happen. Some people can't help themselves. It's just the nature of the beast. And that's why you build your deed or your motion appropriately so that there are some really good consequences. I will say, though, you've got to be really careful. Those that have been watching the news in the last sort of 24 hours, there was the case of the doctor from the Gold Coast who had a research doctorate who was selling certificates for COVID exemptions for $75 a piece. She's just been convicted for not being a health professional. She made about 90 grand and she was fined 25. Now, hopefully something happens with the proceeds of crime legislation, but what you've got to make sure of is that with any approval that you give for renovations, that the consequences of non-compliance are significant enough that your approval is not gamed, right? Because if the costs of non-compliance are less than the advantages to be gained from non-compliance, you know what's going to happen every time, all right? Or it might not be every time, but you know, if you set people up to put them in a position where they're able to make an advantage out of that, it's an invitation. I've been dealing with some particularly difficult people over about the last 4 years on a couple of different matters, and you know, leopards don't change their spots. They just keep on rocking and keep on doing the same thing, and that is pinching other people's land. So anyway, look, that's the end of my prepared presentation. I know that there's a lot in this topic, a lot. So I'm happy to take questions. I haven't delved down into, and section blah, blah says that a minor improvement is $3,000, because that stuff you can find reasonably easily, including on the Commissioner's website. What I want to do for you is to give you more of an idea of a process that you could adopt to actually work through a renovation proposal, whether it's me as your lawyer or another lawyer who's doing it for you, or you as a committee, or you as a lot owner. If you go through that same process, what you'll get to at the end is you can cycle back to the beginning and say, if I change this element of my proposal, I can drop my level of approval from resolution without dissent down to committee. So that's a hell of a lot better, you know. So let's do that. Or likewise, if you're a committee and you've been through one of these and you get to the end and say, right, well, what were we not happy about? You know, we wanted more control over structural changes or fire changes. That's going to feed into a bylaw that you then prepare and get owner buy-in with, so that you can then go and pass it and get it adopted. Righto, so hopefully we've got some questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. We do. We definitely do. We've got some that have come in while you've been speaking, which is great. And sorry to everybody about the issue with chat to begin with. I thought you were all being very quiet, which was unusual because usually we get lots and lots of interaction from the chat, but we fixed that quite quickly. I'll just quickly unshare your screen if that's okay, Michael, so everyone can see you when you're speaking. And we might just jump into some of the submitted questions first, because as I mentioned, Michael and I had a chat about it before, and there's been some really, really good questions submitted. So thank you to everyone who sent those in. So we might just cover, Michael, the first one was from Kelly. Does a lot owner need approval from a body corporate committee or any other approval to install sliding doors in the wall between the lounge and the dining area? I know you have covered this a little bit in the presentation.
Yeah, so look, most likely the answer is no. So an external appearance bylaw is unlikely to pick it up. If there's no renovation bylaw in place, you know, then you've lost on that one, or gained, as the case may be. It's not necessarily structural work. If it's not playing around with, you know, fire issues in relation to the development approval, etc., then odds are no.
Okay, great. That's good news for Kelly, I'd say.
Notice that I've said odds are. So, yeah.
Yes. Another one we had was from Anna, and that one was, we are owner occupiers of a 9-unit block. One of the unit owners have access to the rooftop as part of their living quarters. They have now submitted a proposal to add more structure to the rooftop, which is the main roof of 2 other lots. When the previous owner added structure with no BC approval, this damaged the waterproofing membrane of the roof, and we all had to pay a special levy to get it fixed. Lot owners have had an informal vote and unanimously voted against any more structures. The new owners have put a motion regarding their renovation plans for our AGM in a couple of months. Isn't the roof a common property? Therefore, why are they allowed to build on it? And if the majority of lot owners believe that this will cause nuisance and damage to the structure of the building, do we have to agree to the renovation? We're unsure of our rights.
So the answer to this one is get advice, proper advice, because, you know, you have to make a whole bunch of assumptions. So if you assume, for example, that, you know, part of that roof is part of the lot, and then part is, you know, then you've got common property airspace, then you go through this exercise of, well, is that roof structure going to encroach upon the airspace? And quite often it does, because of head height issues. So then you've got a Katsiwhat issue, because you're making an improvement to the common property for the benefit of the lot. If that then takes a resolution without dissent to grant exclusive use to dispose of an interest in the common property, you've just got to have subjectively reasonable reasons for voting no. So that's a really short summary. There's a whole heap of, you know, legwork involved in making sure that that's a defensible decision. You know, if the majority of the owners say we don't want it, then that's fine, but you should still go through the exercise of making sure that that's a defensible no. When I read this question too, I just want to add one thing. This whole raising a special levy because we've got to repair something that somebody has done in the past, that roofing membrane, if it's, doesn't matter whether it's part of the lot or not, the body corporate's responsible to maintain it. There is a specific provision there that talks about recovering as a debt from the person whose actions caused or contributed to the damage to that membrane. Now, that's a statutory right of recovery, and the limitation period on it is 6 years. So somebody who goes and this is common, I've seen this at least a dozen times. Somebody is repairing or replacing a pergola on their rooftop area, and some idiot drills down through the waterproofing membrane and puts a dynabolt through it without doing the appropriate waterproofing, as, you know, chemset, etc. And then all of a sudden there's a hole in the waterproofing membrane, and then there's water trickling all the way through the scheme. I've had that happen at least a dozen times that I've had to advise on. And so in that situation, I like to turn around and say, right, you know, who did it, and whether it's the contractor, the subcontractor, the lot owner, you look at that provision and say, how much did it cost to repair it? Can we now go and sue that person? So yeah, that's another interesting angle that a lot of bodies corporate should really think about.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. We had one from Ross. How can committees approve air conditioning systems mounted on common property walls, but removing a few courses of bricks or sticking in a window needs a motion without dissent? It seems like an artificial distinction to me.
Yeah, look, it's understandable. That most recent case that I was involved in up at Cairns Aquarius, you know, in this particular instance, because that was enlargement of a window between the lot and the common property, right? And the tribunal member in that case in the appeal said, well, look, when you take away those few courses of bricks and you put this new window in, and by the way, it's not just the window is not just a pane of glass. It's the pane of glass, it's the surround, it's the trims, it's the water, you know, the waterproofing, the sarking, blah, 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 blah. It's this whole system. So when you take away those courses of bricks, you're actually taking away some common property, because the bricks on the lot side are part of the lot, the bricks on the common property side are part of the common property, and you're chucking them away. And that is actually throwing away some common property / body corporate asset once it's been pulled out of the wall. Then when you put the window in, you're then putting in this permanent improvement for the benefit of the lot. It's not for anybody else's benefit, you know. Oh, look, the windows are going to look pretty. It's not for anybody else's benefit. It's for the benefit of the lot. And you're doing that on a permanent basis. Well, of course, you're disposing of an interest in common property. If you take an air conditioner, though, and you say, well, okay, I'm now going to drill 4 holes in some masonry and put in some dynabolts to hold up a bracket to be able to put an air conditioner in place. Well, in that particular instance, you've got that, you know, easement for utility services, because air conditioning is a utility service. It's providing cool air or hot air, as the case may be, into the lot. So there's a definite distinction between those two particular things, yes. But Ross's point, which I understand, is that sometimes you get stuff which is so trifling that you would wonder whether or not it would be caught. You know, there is an old Latin maxim that, you know, the law doesn't concern itself with trifles. I personally wouldn't want to be the person who finds out where that line is. You know, in the instance of the Cairns Aquarius case, it was a reasonably significant change because there was also a structural change, and it changed the whole external appearance of the lot of the building upstairs. If it were a lot more minor, then, you know, maybe it's something that wouldn't have been pursued.
Okay, thank you. And we've just been asked by Judy in chat as well whether we can provide a link to the Katsiwhat decision that you've mentioned a few times. So we might send that out later on. Is that available, Michael? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, that's great. We'll send that out when we send the recording out, everyone, so you can have a look at that as well. Okay, we had one from Miller asking, a new owner of one of the 3 units in our body corporate would like to pave an area of lawn in front of her front door to be able to put a table and chairs on. This will take up body corporate land, and we're wondering about the best way of dealing with the request. As a small body corporate, we all get on well and certainly don't want to alienate a new owner, but at the same time, we're a little concerned. I've suggested she draw up a plan of what she wants to do, and we'll consider the request. This has not happened yet. Do we need to consider her request and come to a compromise?
You always need to consider an owner's request. Don't always need to come to a compromise. My father, who spent many, many years in local government, always used to say to me, listen to what everybody has to say and then make your own damn decision. So this is one of those instances where it's the thin edge of the wedge. I mean, if what the lot owner is saying is, oh, I'd like a barbecue area, please, can I go build it? Well, it's like, okay, well, do you want to pay me for that area of common property that you're about to pinch? Oh, I'm not trying to pinch it. I just want to use it. Well, it's the same thing. You know, if you want to use it, you know, and then in 5 years' time when you sell it, you'll sell it to somebody who says, oh, but I thought that was mine, right? And that's the sort of stuff that happens. So this is about keeping your house in good order. So keeping your house in good order is all about making sure your paperwork's right and all the rest of it. You know, if what that lot owner is proposing is a courtyard for their benefit, then it should be a disposition of an interest in common property. So it's you know, exclusive use, a lease or a license. Then there's the improvements issue. So it's exactly in that Katsiwhat region. That's basically exactly where you land. So again, you know, you look at the proposal and you start, have the conversation, you know, is your intention here that you want to have the permanent use of that land? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, well, pay me for it. You know, I own that land, it's not yours. Just because it's outside your back door doesn't mean that it's yours.
Okay, and then they might want a courtyard on the courtyard and a courtyard on the courtyard.
Yeah. And look, hey, that can start on the flip side. That can change into, well, everybody's unit is the same. Why don't we allocate exclusive use to everybody? And we'll just do it all in one hit. And that's great, because you've just added a whole heap of value. You do have to think about things though, like, and I'm going to give away some strata law secret sauce here again. If you don't do that exclusive use bylaw the correct way, you can end up going from, in a building format plan, building units plan scheme, from the body corporate being obliged to paint all of the walls of that courtyard to the lot owner having to, right? And then you can end up in this situation where, you know, you've got this fractured maintenance responsibility and the building starts looking crappy. So, you know, a good strata lawyer, a very good strata lawyer will identify that and will deal with that in your exclusive use bylaw.
And I guess the good news in this situation for Miller is that the lot owner has asked as well. They haven't just gone ahead and done it. So, yeah, which is a good thing.
I love those ones. I love it when the lot owner just goes ahead. You know, you see the contractors rock up and the concrete saw comes out. It's like, what the hell are you doing? Oh, just renovating my bathroom. Well, I can see daylight through the slab. You know, you're not allowed to do that.
And it does happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, this one's from Liz. Our CMS bylaw states a garage must be used as a garage. Can the committee prevent part of the garage being divided by a floor to ceiling wall to create another room?
Yeah, I'd say probably yes. Probably yes would be the answer to that one. Look, exclusive use bylaws have their own little regime in relation to what improvements you can do to them. And there's sort of two aspects to this question. The first aspect is, depending on what the exclusive use bylaw says, if there's no authority to make an improvement inside the bylaw, then you've got to look at a different spot for the approval for that improvement. Then you've got the issue of, well, what use is it being put to? Can it still be used as a garage if it's been turned into a, you know, gym, you know, workshop, band practice room, as opposed to a garage? So the answer to that one is probably yes, you can, but it would be, again, a bit of prep work. You know, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Do you know that that's contrary to the CMS? You know, to have a talk to us. What are you trying to achieve? Well, I need an extra bedroom. Well, fail. You know, that's going to have that will trigger town planning issues that will need to be addressed. More than likely, it's going to trigger building approval issues because those garages are usually not habitable space, and so there's going to be, you know, issues to do with occupancy as well. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And then we had another one from Ross that came in, and this is probably to do with the easements that you were speaking about in your presentation. So he was just asking, in a tower complex, a building survey plan, each lot has allocated parking spaces in the underground car park, and each car park is common property subject to a grant of exclusive use in favour of the individual lot owners. The concrete ceiling of the car park is about 3 metres above the floor, and there are no height restrictions noted in the CMS regarding the exclusive use grants. So he's just asking, above the car parks, there are a lot of exposed common property utility service infrastructure pipes suspended at different heights from the concrete ceiling. Most of the infrastructure would be at least 2 metres above the floor level, but some is around eye level. There is no suspended ceiling isolating this infrastructure from the car parks below. And so Ross is asking, how high is your airspace in your underground exclusive use car park if there is no height restriction noted in the grant of exclusive use, but there is exposed common property utility services suspended from the ceiling, and who has the use of this space?
Yeah, there's got to be a little bit careful with this one because I may well have a conflict. From a general proposition point of view, the first thing is you've got to work out where the boundaries of your exclusive use area are. And that's the registrar's guidelines for the preparation of plans. So you start there. The other thing is that you can't grant exclusive use over utility infrastructure, which is common property. So the way the adjudicators have typically interpreted that is that if the utility infrastructure was there first, and then there's a grant of exclusive use, then the exclusive use is taken not to include that utility infrastructure. They don't go and kill the exclusive use grant because that's pretty nuclear option. You know, I'm going to find that it was an invalid grant of exclusive use. What they'll typically do is to save the exclusive use bylaw by saying, well, it was obviously intended that the utility infrastructure was not part of the exclusive use grant, right? So, and that's one way that those things are typically dealt with. But I want to pivot on that one, and I'm just conscious of time. You know, one of the buzz issues out there at the moment, no pun intended, is electric cars and electric car charging. You know, I had an interesting one come across my desk the other day, and again, a bit of a secret on this one. The question I got was, hey, well, the hypothetical I got was, look, I want to put a charging point into my exclusive use car park, but I need to hook that up to the mains power, which is down in the car park because there's a meter board. So I need to go from the common property, which has the meter board, to bring power over to my charging station where my car is, to then be able to charge my car overnight. And my lot is actually not too far away, and I'd like to put the smart monitoring stuff back up to the unit, you know, etc. And I looked at it and I said, well, okay, your problem is that there's no utility service statutory easement in favour of exclusive use because it's still common property. Exclusive use is still common property, so there's no easement against common property in favour of common property, right? So a bit of a problem. So then I turned the proposition on its head and I said, well, that's only the case when what you're actually doing is charging the car at the charging point. Most of these electric vehicles can actually be used as backup batteries for your unit. So, and I've looked at this because I'm a strata unit owner, I own my office. I've looked at, you know, buying an electric car, charging it with solar power at the office during the day, driving it home and using it as a battery for my house overnight. The kooky thing is that if you then connect power from your charging station back up to your unit, okay, so that you're then using your car as a battery, all of a sudden you've got all the easements that you need because you actually have an easement against the common property in favour of your lot for the provision of a utility service, which is backup battery power, right? And then you're also then, you know, able to grab that electrical connection from the mains power because it's coming back to your lot as well. So that's in favour of your lot against the common property. So all of a sudden it all starts stacking up. And to really bend your mind, you then have a look at what if your power has to go through somebody else's exclusive use on the way. Now, I'm not going to give that one away. I won't tell you the answer to that one. If you're in that situation, give me a call and I'll charge you.
It's so, I'm glad that you took a bit of a segue down that path though, because we get so many questions in about, obviously, about EV charging at the moment, because buildings are trying to figure out how to do it. And it's just, yeah, such a minefield out there as well. Does the unit owner do it? Does the committee actually take a stand and do it? Do they retrofit? Do they do it as part of their embedded network? Like, there are so many different avenues that they can look at. And do they start planning for it now is the other thing too. I think there are buildings out there that are starting to implement it into their maintenance plan, so they know that they've got it coming up in the future at some point. So it's good to see that the conversations are happening.
Look, you know, it's going to sound like a horrible value judgment, but when you've got a lot owner and you're trying to traverse a couple of exclusive use car parking spaces in a basement, and all you're doing is putting in, you know, inch conduit with an electrical cable in it and some saddle clamps and some masonry nails, and you've got a lot owner who says, no, I'm not going to let you do it. I mean, good on you, buddy, for killing the planet, is what I like to say. Well done, planet killer. Stop being a nong. You're being a pain in the butt unreasonably. And I personally think, the adjudicators would probably put themselves in a position where they'd be looking to overturn that sort of decision, even if it was up to that person. And I think there's a clever way of making sure that it's not, because that sort of stuff just stands in the way of progress. I mean, you're not talking about, taking up half of somebody's exclusive use space. The smart thing to do is get common solutions going. I mean, I love the idea of, aggregating those electric car batteries and reselling it back to the body corporate, and then selling power that's been generated in the office to, during the day to lot owners overnight and all that sort of jazz. Another little one that I've been working on for a while is actually shared facilities agreements between adjacent bodies corporate behind the meter, so that you can share solar generation, particularly where you've got commercial next to residential. So there's all sorts of things like that can be done. But I know we're a little bit off the renovation topic. But yeah.
But it is interesting, and it's things that we'll see, I think, more and more as we move forward, and solutions that are a little bit outside the box too, which is really great. But they sound really good. Okay, so we haven't really addressed any of the questions that have come in during chat. We were talking about the ones that were submitted, and I do note that we are running out of time, but we might just jump in. There's one here from David, and he's basically the flip of the side that we were talking about, the lot owner who asked, and this is a lot owner that's gone ahead and done the work. So what can we do about a committee member who added a concrete slab to common property at the border of his lot without body corporate approval? We did a VOC to tell him the slab had to match other slabs on the common property, which were pebble surfaced, and then he put in an application to put artificial plastic grass on top of the slab. It was rejected by a VOC, but he went ahead and did it anyway. So what do we do now?
It's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Right? And look, there is a philosophy out there that decision makers like adjudicators and judges, etc., adopt a position that if something is done, then they're reluctant to require that it be undone. Okay, that it's a human foible, right? There was a famous case up here a couple of years ago, many years ago, of the construction at Shearwater Resort. And there were many jokes made about it because it's sort of 90 centimetres too tall. And the issue was, does Shearwater need to be shorn back to the point where it's within its development approval? And of course, that's not the outcome. And strangely enough, another one at Boulevard Esplanade had the same issue. And, one view is, it was just bad surveying or bad construction. And the other view was, no, they knew exactly what they were doing and they did it deliberately. Where there's been plenty of prior communication, and you can show that there's been plenty of prior communication, someone's just barreled ahead, that propensity to say, well, they shouldn't have to remove it, tends to fall away. So in this instance, I would really, if I was instructed on that, the way I'd look at it is, okay, give me the correspondence. What was the course of communication? Let's have a look at where the improvement's been done. Is it an encroachment? Does it fall foul of the Katsiwhat test? If it does, reasonably, is there a solution? Can it be, resurfaced, etc.? What does that cost? I'd probably put that as a proposition and say, look, dude, this is going to be resolved one of two ways. You're either going to fix it at your cost, or we're going to go to the adjudicator. We're going to get an order for you to remove it, right? Or we're going to try to. But bear in mind that differences between pebblecrete and ordinary concrete, not so much of a difference. Whereas chucking something onto common property without approval, doesn't matter what it is, could be the most beautiful pebblecrete known to man. But if it's an encroachment and it's permanent and it falls foul of the Katsiwhat test, you're pretty safe going and asking for it to be removed. So it's not, concrete versus pebblecrete. It is get rid of the whole damn thing because it's not allowed to be there. But we'll accept a compromise, and here's the compromise. That's probably the way I'd tackle it.
Okay. All right. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for that. Now, Michael, at the end of the session, I always ask our presenters if they've got something to share with us. I know you've shared some, I think there's been three lawyer secrets already that you've shared with us. So we appreciate that. Have you got anything else that you'd like to add, or something that we haven't discussed that you want to bring up?
Just trawling through some of the comments, just a couple of quick ones. Yes, I definitely represent lot owners against bad bodies corporate. Do that all the time. Development approval conditions and where they fit in. Typically, they're going to rank in priority to anything that a body corporate can do, unless the development approval gets changed. And that, development approvals are not set in stone. They can be changed. There's a couple of other little ones, but yeah. And look, minor improvements limit was another one. What is that? The first time I've heard of it. In each one of the regulation modules, if you have a look at owner improvements to common property as the section, you'll find it. But yeah, the Commissioner's Office, I sort of pitched at a certain level because there is really solid stuff on the Commissioner's website about maintenance and owner improvements already.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your time with us today. A pleasure as always.
My pleasure. It was a bunch of fun.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks for joining us for this educational session. If you gained value from the information, please like this video. You can also engage further with LookUpStrata by subscribing to our YouTube channel or by being kept informed about Strata news via our regular newsletters. Our subscribe link is listed in the description box below.